Conservative Media Roundup. What Washington State's watchdogs are reporting. Good evening. This is your conservative media update covering the stories that mainstream outlets in the Pacific Northwest either won't touch or won't cover honestly. We're looking specifically at what independent voices like Brandy Cruz's unDivided and Glenn Morgan's We the Governed have been reporting this week out of Washington State. And folks, if you thought things were bad in Seattle and Olympia before, buckle up, because what these investigative journalists are uncovering shows just how deep the dysfunction runs. Let's start with unDivided. Brandy Cruz, the Emmy-winning former Fox affiliate reporter who left mainstream television to launch her independent show back in 2021, has been on fire this week covering what she's calling Seattle's shift into full-blown socialism. And she's not being hyperbolic. According to her latest episodes, Seattle's new socialist mayor is already making moves that should alarm anyone who cares about property rights and fiscal responsibility. Cruz reports that the administration wants taxpayers to foot the bill for what she calls daydreamers, essentially funding programs that prioritize ideology over practical solutions to the city's very real problems. But it gets worse. Cruz revealed on Monday that the city says it's not decriminalizing drugs, but as she points out, history tells us that's exactly what they're doing. We've seen this playbook before. They make promises about accountability and enforcement, then quietly let everything slide in the name of compassion. Meanwhile, tent encampments are exploding across the city. And speaking of those encampments, here's something that should make your blood boil. Despite spending billions, that's billions with a B, to update Seattle's waterfront, the city's tourism numbers are absolutely in the toilet. You heard that right. They took your money, poured it into a massive development project, and somehow tourism is down. That's the kind of management you get when ideology trumps competence. Cruz also covered a particularly disturbing story about Seattle public schools. She reports that not even kids with learning disabilities are immune from what she describes as indoctrination. These are vulnerable children who need extra support and specialized education, and instead they're being subjected to political programming. When you can't even leave special education students alone to focus on their actual educational needs, you've lost the plot entirely. One of the more eyebrow-raising segments this week involved Washington State admitting, and this is according to state documents, that they overstated climate benefits by 9,500%. Let that sink in, not 95%. 9,500%, and these are the people lecturing the rest of us about following the science. Cruz has also been tracking threats against independent journalists in Washington State. She reports that journalists covering voter fraud allegations are being intimidated. This isn't happening in some authoritarian country overseas. This is happening right here in Washington State, where asking questions about election integrity apparently makes you a target. On a national note, unDivided covered the news that former vice presidential candidate Tim Walz announced he won't seek re-election in Minnesota. Cruz's commentary suggested this might be the first honest decision he's made in years. Now let's turn to We the Governed. Glenn Morgan is a name that makes Washington State Democrats absolutely furious, and there's a good reason for that. Since founding We the Governed back in 2016, Morgan has been filing campaign finance complaints, exposing government corruption, and generally making life difficult for politicians who thought they were above the law. Morgan was recently named Volunteer of the Year by the Washington State Republican Party, which tells you everything you need to know about how effective his work has been. The Linwood Times even dubbed him their 2024 Political Trickster of the Year for orchestrating what might be the most brilliant piece of political theater in recent Washington history. Here's what happened. Morgan convinced two other men named Bob Ferguson to run for governor as Democrats, alongside the actual Bob Ferguson, who was then the state's attorney general. The real Bob Ferguson did not find this amusing and threatened legal action if the other Fergusons didn't drop out by May 13th. They eventually did, but not before making Ferguson's campaign look absolutely ridiculous. According to reports, Morgan has won over 74 lawsuits exposing violations since 2016. That includes 21 judgments based on his reporting that were actually filed by the Washington State Attorney General's office. Think about that. The AG's office had to file suits based on violations that Morgan uncovered. That's not partisan hackery, that's actual investigative work that forced even Democrats to take action. Morgan has been particularly focused on exposing what he calls the Act Blue campaign finance money laundering scheme. His recent videos have detailed how this massive fundraising platform may be facilitating illegal activity, and he's been gathering documentation to prove it. This week, Morgan's been hammering away at the Washington State Department of Licensing, which he says is in panic mode. According to his reporting, Governor Ferguson knows there are serious problems at the agency, but instead of fixing them, they're trying to manage the public relations disaster. Morgan recently submitted a petition to Governor Ferguson demanding the removal of 4 corrupt commissioner appointments that were made by former Governor Jay Inslee to the Washington Fish and Wildlife Commission. These aren't just political disagreements. Morgan's petition alleges actual malfeasance and lawbreaking over several years. He's provided detailed documentation, and now he's waiting to see if Ferguson has the courage to clean house. The contrast between these independent outlets and mainstream media coverage couldn't be starker. While legacy news organizations in Seattle continue to run interference for progressive politicians, journalists like Cruz and Morgan are doing the actual investigative work that used to be the standard for local news. Cruz often jokes that she's doing the legacy media's job for them, but it's not really a joke. When was the last time you saw a mainstream Seattle outlet dig into the details of campaign finance violations? When did you see them question the astronomical cost overruns on public projects that deliver no results? When did they seriously investigate the explosion of homelessness despite billions in spending? You didn't, because they won't. This is why independent conservative media in Washington state has become so vital. These aren't partisan hacks making things up. Brandy Cruz is a former mainstream journalist with an Emmy and an Edward R. Murrow Award. Glenn Morgan has won dozens of lawsuits proving his allegations were accurate. They're not conspiracy theorists. They're doing journalism. And what they're uncovering should concern every Washingtonian, regardless of political affiliation, because whether you're left, right, or center, you should care when your government lies about climate data, wastes billions of your tax dollars, and threatens journalists who ask uncomfortable questions. The question is, will enough people pay attention before it's too late? That's your conservative media roundup for this week. Stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay skeptical of any politician who tells you they have all the answers.